Hello, everybody, and welcome to Red Wings Daily, presented to you by FanArch. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight, author of the Voices of Hockey. Broadcasters reflect on the fastest game on earth, coming to you from the southwest corner of Washington State, tucked away back here in the Pacific Northwest. There's only one game on the slate over the weekend in the NHL. There's only one game on the slate tonight, because three teams have already punched their ticket. We have two teams just looking to punch that fourth into the Final Four, and that is Buffalo and Montreal. Now, they had game 6 over the weekend. It was a game that started off where you're thinking, okay, Buffalo has got this, right? 30 seconds in, Dahlin scores. Wrong. A minute later, Montreal counters with Shakai with a goal, so it's 1-1 about a minute and a half in, looking like this might be a barn burner. Over the next 10 or so minutes, Montreal gets two special teams goals, one power play goal and one shorthanded goal. At this point, it's 3-1. Maybe about a little over halfway into the first period. Okay, they've only had 4 shots. So you're thinking great defense, great defense, Buffalo, to only allow 4 shots through about the first 11 minutes of the first period. The only problem is that Alex Lyon gave up 3 goals on those 4 shots. So they pull Lyon, they bring in Luckinen. No more goals are going to be scored for Montreal the rest of the way. So at 3-1 right here, halfway into the first period, where you think it might be just completely running away from the Buffalo Sabres, in fact, they're the ones who start running away, scoring 7 straight goals over the rest of the game, with 6 different players scoring those 7 goals. So they obviously get to Dobis, and they're forcing Game 7 tonight in Buffalo. Basically 4-2 so far in these 6 games for the road team. The road team has won 4 out of the 6. This is the second Game 7 that Montreal is playing so far in just 2 rounds. They went, the road team went 5-2 in that opening series between Tampa Bay and Montreal. So far, the road team's 4-2. So maybe the last thing you want to be is the home team in this game. In that case, that's Buffalo. But Buffalo is coming off of just blowing them out 8-3 and maybe deciding, hey, we might have to use home ice advantage. We may have to get our crowd into this. Obviously, Second Life, they probably thought after Game 5 that was the last time they'll be seeing this team for the summer, and it's not. So who knows? It'll be a winner-take-all Game 7. Those are the best that you can get in postseason matchups. And Luckinen probably is going to get the start. It's been funny, this hockey goalie carousel that these two have had, because Luckinen sometimes has been the one that's really not had the hot hand. They'd had to bring in Lyon. That's what they had to do in the first round against Boston. And they brought in Lyon, and he took care of business on the road. So Buffalo, speaking of road, Buffalo's 5-1 on the road so far in the playoffs. They've only lost 1 game to Montreal sometime in this series. On the road in that arena that seats 22,000 people. So they've taken care of business in probably the most home crowd friendly arena in all of NHL. They've been able to take care of business 2 out of 3 times in that to basically bring back for Game 7 there in Buffalo. So we'll have to see which team shows up. We'll have to see if this is going to be a barn burner or a blowout. You thought it was going to be a blowout going Montreal's way. It wasn't. Buffalo actually ended up with the blowout. 7 straight goals. Doesn't happen very often, especially in a playoff atmosphere. So we'll have to see, and we'll have a recap of that game tomorrow in tomorrow's show. Transitioning from the NHL to the AHL, the Griffins played on Saturday, and, well, they find themselves now in an 0-2 hole in this division final to the Chicago Wolves after an overtime loss in Game 2. It went, Dries and MBN. Okay, this is what's frustrating, I'm sure, for a lot of Griffins fans, is that they got off to a 2-0 lead, and then they were up 3-1. So Dries and MBN with early goals. Sorum for Chicago gets one back, so it's 2-1 at this point after Sorum scores for Chicago. Trollmarks gets the goal back about a minute 45 later. So at that point, you're sitting there thinking, okay, they get on the board, but we answer back. That's the backbreaker a lot of times in hockey, right? When you basically get a goal back after they feel like they've got the momentum, you're thinking that is going to crush their spirits. Wrong. Rybikin gets the only goal in the second period Foot ties it with about 6 minutes left to go, and then Sorum, with his second goal of the game, wins it in overtime, basically puts the Griffins in an 0-2 hole right now. That's what they're looking at going into Game 3, which is going to be in Chicago, and that's going to be tomorrow night. So we'll have a recap of that game on Wednesday's show. Postov for Grand Rapids had 25 saves on 29 shots, but Primo, 36 saves on 39 shots. Basically the better goaltender in this game, obviously, facing a lot more shots and giving up less. So Game 3, like I said, on Tuesday, the Griffins are looking to avoid the sweep, and they probably are avoiding sleep right now because they're probably wondering, how did we give up a 3-1 lead to get ourselves in this position? But we'll have to see if they can do a little bit of road damage in Chicago and really turn this series into something more competitive and force Game 4 and then maybe force Game 5. But right now it's not looking too good for them. They've been usually decent on the road. Like I said before, this was they went 6-3-1 against Chicago during the regular season, and they were all close games, or most of them were close games. There was only a couple games that were decided by more than one goal, but about 6 of those games were decided by one goal. So they obviously have been played pretty closely by Chicago throughout the regular season. Chicago playing closely enough against them in the postseason, obviously, and it's really a head scratcher, I'm sure, for the Griffins right now to see that they're in this position, and they're going to have to do some road magic to make it work. So going back to the NHL, we're talking about UFAs. I've been doing a UFA sighting pretty much every day for quite a while now, and I decided to look up Haula. Now, Eric Haula, the reason I brought up Eric Haula because he played for the Golden Knights in that magical year and the inaugural season, and he was second in the team in scoring with 29 goals. He almost had the 30th goal. That was the year that William Karlsson had about 43 goals, was second in the league. But yes, Eric Haula had 29 goals, obviously looking like a total standout offensively, did a great job. In year 2, not too far into the season, he breaks his leg, and he's pretty much done for the year. So there you go, as far as one of those nails in the coffin, almost, you think. That was 8 years ago. Season 2 for the Golden Knights was 8 seasons ago. So we're talking about a guy who's recuperated from a broken leg 8 years later, 35 years old. His price tag is $3.15 million. I do not know how much I feel he is worth that at 35. And like I said, when you have an injury like that so early in your career, look at Mike Trout over in baseball. I mean, Mike Trout is doing great this year, but for the last several years, he has been injured on and off constantly. Haula hasn't really broken the 20-goal barrier in any of the seasons since that 29 goal for the Golden Knights. So for him to have that 3.15 at the age of 35, he plays for Nashville with former teammate Jonathan Marchessault. I still think that this is one that we do not indulge in. I don't think that we should go after this. That's kind of a high price tag, kind of a lot of miles on those tires, and let's face it, one of those tires is long since recuperated from a broken leg. I'm not saying that he's not capable of doing anything, but those are things you think about is how aggravating does that injury get later on in the career? And I will feel that, a broken leg is something that always going to stay with you. And especially when you start getting up in your years, it's going to really start to show. He's been consistent at the 14 or 15 goal mark pretty much most of the seasons, or 13 or so, but still 13 goals is definitely not worth $3.15 million. That's just not going to happen. So once again, I have one of those say no to this one, but we're going to keep bringing out other ones that possibly are good and prosperous and a good investment for us moving forward, because we need to do something to spur this offense. But I don't think a 35-year-old who suffered a leg injury 9 years ago is really the way to do it, especially with that kind of price tag. You could probably sign Kane for one more year, and I think his wheels are a little bit stronger, even though he's got 4 years on Haula as far as age goes. Going the wrong way, I say. I still think that you definitely want to stick with somebody like him rather than Haula. A proven veteran and a proven scorer. Okay, to close out the show today, basically, I want to talk about the coaching carousel that's going on right now in the NHL. So we had 2 firings basically beginning on, I think it was Wednesday and then Thursday last week. So I wanted to talk about the 6 firings that happened in the NHL and kind of what has been as a result. So let's start with the first firing of the 25-26 season. That was when Dean Evason from Columbus was fired on January 12th. Rick Bowness took over as coach, and the team went 21-11-5, and they almost got to the playoffs. So that paid off. Obviously, if they would have maybe had a better coaching move early, if they would have made a change maybe earlier, if Bowness was that effective, they possibly could have made the playoffs. So now going over to the Western Conference, Jim Hiller, March 1, was fired from the Kings. DJ Smith takes over and then leads them to the playoffs. So good story there. And, they obviously got swept in the first round, but they didn't look like they were going anywhere near the playoffs at the point that they fired Jim Hiller in March. I mean, that's pretty late in the season. And that for them to basically make that turnaround right there, pretty good. Speaking of great turnarounds, okay, on March 29th, about 4 weeks after that, Bruce Cassidy's fired by the Golden Knights. We all know this story. Tortorella goes 7-0-1 to finish out the regular season. The team wins the division. They've gone 8-2 in the 8-4 in the playoffs since. So he is 15-4-1 overall as Vegas' coach. That obviously is one of those, yes, good job. I mean, the Golden Knights went from maybe not even make the playoffs. Now they're in the Final Four. And that was a late change. And a lot of people question it because you're like, there's only 2.5 weeks left in the season. Why are we doing this? Well, that's why we do this. Patrick Waugh. Now, that one happened about a week later, maybe a little over a week later. Fired by the Islanders. Pete DeBoer takes over. We'll have to see how that goes. Obviously, the Islanders didn't make the playoffs. They looked like they were set to go into the playoffs. I think they were sitting at number 2 in the Metropolitan Conference for quite a while there, but then Pittsburgh overtook them, and then Philadelphia overtook them for the 3 spot. They didn't even make the 7 or 8 seed. So obviously a huge turnaround in the wrong direction for New York. Pete DeBoer's a great coach. I like to look at him as the great vice president coach, silver medalist coach, I guess you could say. That's what he was for the Golden Knights for several years, basically showing up. And he's been that so many times where he's been the coach on the losing side of the handshake in deep rounds, but not quite getting over the hump and getting the cup. So we'll have to see if anything changes for the Islanders. Obviously, too small of a sample size in the season to see how that went. Other ones, so the last 2, basically, Craig Berube was fired by the Toronto Maple Leafs after the season, in the playoffs right now. And they're still obviously looking for another coach, I think. I don't think they've figured a coach yet for them yet. But Chris Knobloch, this is one that's interesting. Okay, Chris Knobloch fired by the Oilers the next day. So this was last Thursday that Knobloch gets fired. This is where it gets interesting because the Golden Knights have said that they've prohibited Cassidy from talking with Edmonton. I think he's still being paid. He's still kind of under contract with the Golden Knights, even though they fired him. So this is starting to raise this stink in the NHL. I think on social media, a lot of people are burning up the Knights for this because it's like you fired the guy, just let him go do his thing. Being a Golden Knights fan myself, I still tend to agree with that. I still tend to agree with let the guy go. I mean, you've already fired him. Do not rub more salt into the wound. I liked Cassidy. He brought us to, he brought us, not us, but he brought the Golden Knights to the Stanley Cup. And, but it's obviously, it wasn't working out for him there, and it's time for a change in the guard. And I think that it's totally fine if Edmonton interviews him. I don't understand. They're starting to seem a little Steinbrenner-ish. Bill Foley, I call him Nostradamus Bill because he predicted a cup in 6 years, and that's exactly what it took. But come on, guys. Do not be this team. You already are getting this bad rep after, ignoring the media in after Game 6 and now losing a draft pick and fining Tortorella, $100,000. Do not get the moniker of being the hated and the bad boys. We don't want to do that. So this has been Red Wings Daily, presented to you by FanArch. I'm your host, Kirk MckNight, LGRW from the P&W.